Fly. Thank you so kindly, Andrew from The Crucible. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This evening's topic is toxic masculinity real? I think everybody's looking forward to this one. So, Ghosty, if you'd like to start with your opening statements, please.
Sure, thanks. Okay, so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think a lot of people get toxic masculinity confused with just demonizing all masculine traits. So I want to provide a definition and kind of an alternative definition, which says the same thing basically for toxic masculinity, which is acting on toxic or unhealthy behaviors to prove or display masculinity, or in an alternative definition is behaviors or traits that are inherently masculine used in a toxic, unhealthy, or negative way. And I'll give some examples. So something like overaggression. So starting unnecessary fights, or an extreme example would be like domestic violence, unhealthy sexual behaviors like inappropriate hypersexuality or sexual acts, habitual cheating, and even homophobia. Possessiveness over their partners, so extreme jealousy, tracking their partner's location, not allowing their partner to see friends without him attending, and a lack of emotional intelligence is another example. So if like a guy is worried about being seen as feminine, so he's kind of lacking in the emotional intelligence department, that's like another example. And then even some excessive or obsessive behaviors like an obsession with money or sex to an unhealthy degree could be an example of toxic masculinity. But remember, so in order for these behaviors to be in the toxic masculinity category, they need to be done by a man specifically because he believes that this behavior is connected to his manhood in some way. So like a man who cheats on his girlfriend, maybe because he was young and in love with some girl and didn't know what to do, isn't necessarily toxic masculinity. Whereas a guy who cheats on his girlfriends because he thinks that's just something normal for men to do, that would be toxic masculinity. Or like, sorry, okay. I hate reading. I hate the intros. Okay.
It's okay.
Gonna take a breath. Okay. So a guy who gets into like a few fights throughout his lifetime, that's not necessarily toxic masculinity, but if he is doing it because if he's just like unnecessarily starting fights to prove his manhood, that would be a example of toxic masculinity. So sorry, now I lost. Okay, so yeah, it's again acting on toxic or unhealthy behavior to prove or display masculinity. There are plenty of non-toxic, completely healthy and natural masculine behaviors. What matters is how they are being used. I also believe in toxic femininity. There are plenty of feminine behaviors that women use in toxic or unhealthy ways, but society has yet to really use the term, and I personally would like to see this talked about more, but that's kind of a different discussion. So I just want to make it clear that the term toxic masculinity is not to demonize masculine traits. It is a way to describe how some men abuse certain masculine traits, which are sometimes perpetuated in our society and normalized. And normalizing toxic masculinity actually hurts men. So when we normalize toxic masculine traits or behavior in society and make excuses like boys will be boys or use their gender to excuse these negative behaviors, this actually hurts men. Rather, we should be teaching boys how to channel their masculine traits into healthy, positive, appropriate, and useful ways. But when we start to normalize toxic masculinity and perpetuate the idea that these bad behaviors are solely attributed to their manhood, I see this as an insult to men. Like, men are so primal, they can't help themselves, they have no self-control, etc., which is obviously not true. So, and then lastly, when I say toxic in this context, I'm using it to describe something that is detrimental, damaging, or hurtful to oneself or others. So why would we normalize behavior traits that set men back and claim it's normal due to their gender, rather than teaching them all the positive traits about masculinity and how many good things it can be used for?
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Ghosty. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think that was fantastically well said. I agree with pretty much everything there. Also, it's good to see everybody.
Stop saying Ryan.
What?
Nothing. I was saying it's good to see you, Ryan. I got your tooth, by the way.
Stop it. It's opening statement.
Good evening. We often find profound truths in unexpected places. Consider Shrek, the grumpy, isolated ogre living in his swamp. On the surface, it's a fairy tale parody, but look closer, and we see a narrative that resonates deeply with the struggles many men face concerning isolation, self-perception, and the fundamental need for connection. Shrek begins his story deliberately alone, believing, as he says, people judge me before they even know me. That's why I'm better off alone. He builds walls, embraces solitude, a defense mechanism against anticipated rejection. This mirrors a pattern recognized in research. Societal pressures often push men towards a strong and silent ideal, leading them to suppress vulnerability, avoid seeking help, and sometimes preferring isolation over the risk of judgment. This isn't just a fairy tale trope. It reflects a documented rise in male loneliness, sometimes called a silent epidemic, linked to poor mental health outcomes and also suicidal ideations. Shrek, like many men, has layers. He's like an onion, complex beneath his gruff exterior, hiding pain and a longing to be truly seen. This brings us to our first core point, grounded in observation and research. Certain specific interpretations and rigid applications of masculine norms, like the pressure for absolute emotional stoicism, the avoidance of vulnerability, or equating strength solely with toughness, demonstrably lead to negative consequences. These consequences include harm to oneself, manifesting as isolation, anxiety, depression, and reluctance to seek help. They include harm to others through strained relationships, difficulty connecting, or even aggression born from unprocessed pain. And they hinder the well-being of our communities. Shrek's initial misery, his pushing away of Donkey's persistent friendship, his very belief that he must be alone, these illustrate the harmful outcomes of these specific rigid patterns. Now here's our crucial point of common ground, our second premise. None of us desire these negative outcomes. Whether we prioritize secular values or Christian values, we can still unite around essential values like well-being, empathy, love, stewardship, and respect for human dignity. And building on that shared foundation, we can also find ourselves sharing a fundamental rejection of unnecessary harm, isolation, disrespect, and the lack of self-control that fuels destructive behavior. Shrek himself, after pushing everyone away following the misunderstanding with Fiona, realizes he's utterly miserable. His own experience tells him that isolation born from fear and rigidity is undesirable. We, as observers, root for him not to stay alone, but to connect. We intrinsically value connection, healthy relationships, and individual flourishing. Therefore, our conclusion, and the core of my position tonight, is this. When we use the term toxic masculinity, we're not condemning masculinity itself, nor are we attacking men. Instead, we're using a specific term to identify those particular harmful distortions and rigid applications of masculine norms that produce the negative consequences we all agree are undesirable. It's a diagnostic label for patterns, like Shrek's initial fear-driven isolation and emotional suppression, patterns that demonstrably cause harm. Addressing these specific distortions, differentiating healthy assertiveness from harmful domination, distinguishing emotional resilience from crippling emotional suppression, separating responsible protection from possessive control, is not about weakening men. It's about fostering healthier individuals capable of genuine connection, like Shrek eventually finds with Donkey and Fiona. It's about building stronger families and communities, goals aligned across diverse ethical frameworks. Shrek's journey wasn't about becoming less of an ogre. It was about shedding the toxic patterns born of fear and societal judgment to embrace authentic connection and self-acceptance, ultimately finding happiness not in solitude, but in community. Our goal tonight should be similar, to identify these harmful patterns constructively, drawing on shared values so we can explore pathways towards healthier expressions of masculinity that benefit everyone.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Neo, to you. You're muted.
Apologies, it's my first debate. First and foremost, Sarah, thank you for hosting this debate. Thank you for Andrew filling in last minute, and thank you to our debate partners here. I don't really have a super long opening statement. I wrote a couple of things last minute because I was working all day, but I will read it out loud, and then I'll yield the rest of my time over to Andrew. So today I stand against the idea of toxic masculinity, not because I deny the existence of harmful behaviors in our society, but because I believe that the term itself is misleading, divisive, and counterproductive. The term toxic masculinity unfairly paints masculinity as inherently dangerous, when in reality, traits like strength, leadership, and stoicism can be powerful forces for good, rather than targeting specific harmful behaviors like violence or emotional repression. The term broadly attaches blame, stigmatizes boys and men who are simply trying to understand who they are in this confusing world. Let's be clear. Bad behavior is bad behavior, no matter who exhibits it. But by labeling it as masculine, we shut down meaningful conversation and alienate the very people we should be empowering. Masculinity is not the enemy. Oversimplifying labels are. And that's all I have on that. But I will say in short, the idea of men being inherently toxic, I will always stand against that, just because I, by myself, am a man. And I don't believe that I am a toxic person, nor do I believe that many of the other people that surround us in this world are toxic. I simply think we are who we are. We exist in this broad spectrum that a lot of people don't seem to understand, nor take the time to really properly understand us. And I'm hoping that tonight we are able to have a pretty good conversation here and see what this is all really about. So with that, I yield the rest of my time to Andrew.
Thank you, Neo. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Toxic masculinity is an 80s term from a bunch of crazy ass spiritualists who worked it into the public consciousness. Later, the term was proliferated by a bunch of feminists and psychologists, but ultimately, for the sake of time, let me reduce its meaning. Toxic masculinity just means behavior in men which lacks some perception of appropriate or reasonable by fucking women. That's it. Generally, this is based around empathy and not having enough empathy to placate whatever idiot harpy is upset with their behavior. That's it. That's all it is. We could easily say toxic femininity, which would be the traits and characteristics of women which have made their behavior suboptimal from a man's perspective, would be saying the same thing in reverse. Let me introduce you to a different term which fits better: social carnage. When women and men who act like women are referring and talking about toxic masculinity, they're actually referring to this term, social carnage. Men engage in social carnage as part of not only masculinity, but as a part of what they actually are based on physiology. Examples of, quote, toxic masculinity, which is actually social carnage, would be things like the open palm slap to a woman's rear they were in a relationship with, causing her some kind of physical pain for the man's own personal amusement. Getting your first BB gun and shooting indiscriminately every bird you can find because it's really fucking fun. Creating a diabolical trap for an evil raccoon or squirrel that has been feeding on your birdseed dispenser, where said diabolical trap has a maze of corridors filled with additional ways for the critter to die horribly, which they must evade, only to, in the end, find out it was never going to escape, but you had a conibear trap laid there too, and it was always going to slam shut, crushing the little bastard's skull. Then you jump out and you do the ha ha ha, you little fucker dance, which goes like this. Ha ha ha, you little fucker. I fucking killed you. Ha 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 ha. Now, while you know, some woman somewhere is looking on disapprovingly, social carnage includes hazing, moderate bullying, shit talking, being reasonably mean, being somewhat churlish. Okay? Includes all those things. Disagreeable. Laughing occasionally at the misfortunes of horrible people, and sometimes laughing at the misfortunes of your own friends, causing people a bit of distress for your own personal amusement. While driving down the road, swerving slightly for the raccoon, which everybody knows is 10 points, while your wife calls you a monster and you laugh at her. That, my friends, is social carnage. And we fucking need it real bad. Understand, men are a necessary component in society, specifically because they can handle violence without becoming emotionally invested. They can even look at killing as just a job and turn it on and off. Sometimes it will. This behavior assists men in finding the limits of what is socially acceptable among other men, so we understand how to properly execute our roles as protectors, providers, resource gatherers, and processors. I'll never forget my first time in a kill plant listening to pigs screaming at the top of their lungs while being summarily dispatched by a guy who was talking about how he can't wait to take his son out for a football game this weekend. The casual way he went about slaughtering the food, which would later fill society's belly, while at the same time only thinking about the future of his family, should put this in perspective for you. Men are uniquely equipped for that role, and women aren't. They don't understand the complexity of how men perceive empathy and the social duties we have, instead finding our ability to turn off our empathy, including towards them for the betterment of society and others, as being, quote, toxic. It isn't toxic. It is necessary social carnage, of which women and children are the primary beneficiaries. And women should honestly just shut their fucking mouths about it, because they clearly don't understand it, and that's fine. You don't need to understand it. You just need to get out of the way. Behaviors or traits which are masculine used in an unhealthy way Okay. You can just say that that's definitionally true about any term that you come up with and call it whatever you want. It's a proprietary, you're making up a proprietary term. So here, I'll say toxic masculinity is anybody named Ghosty. Therefore, you are now toxically masculine for my proprietary definition. It's a stupid argument. They say homophobia. Homophobia is toxic masculinity. According to who? According to who? You? What makes you the fucking authority on what is toxic masculinity? Nobody. That's who. And by the way, homophobia is often fucking based and is part of in-group preference. It is part of the things which are necessary for the good conditioning of a social society. They bring on lack of emotional intelligence. Doesn't mean fucking anything. Emotional intelligence is stupid and it means nothing. What do? Do we get together with a bunch of women and ask them if they feel heard? Is that what emotional intelligence is? Do we come up with a little testy test where we have how do you measure that? How do I measure empathy? What is the unit of measurement that I would use for this? They're just trying to make the term toxic masculinity definitionally true. Progressives do this all the time. I'm going to completely dismantle it. Also, Ryan, Shrek didn't do anything wrong. A bunch of feminized fairy tale creatures tried to steal his shit, and he still went on to fulfill his great duty. What was wrong with Shrek wanting to be alone? And also, you failed to point out that his broad lied to him about being cursed so that Shrek would have to marry a monster, Ryan. You didn't point that out, Ryan. That was a very important plot point, which you omitted, which proved that there was no such thing as toxic masculinity in Shrek. It was a diabolical plot by a bunch of feminized fairy tale creatures, along with a heartless woman who was willing to lie to get her way in a marriage that she desired for her own personal benefit. With that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you so much kindly. And don't forget, I believe everybody here is dual streaming. If you can like, subscribe, and share on any of their ends, I believe the mods will be dropping their channels in the chat throughout the evening. We will go into the debate. We will read and respond to super chats after closing statements, and then we will go into open panel dumpster fire. Outside of that, I leave the floor to all of you. It is open.
If I can just real quick, and I'm going to yield the floor to Ghosty after this, but I just want to address the Shrek criticisms. It's funny that you accuse me of leaving out core details about the story, but you don't even mention Lord Farquaad either, the villain of the movie. And you accuse Fiona of lying to Shrek to marry him, which is not at all what happened in that movie.
Do you know why, though? Hang on, I actually have a good reason for this.
She was revealed to be an ogre well before Shrek and her actually really connected in a romantic way.
Okay, hang on, Ryan
was going off to marry
Farquaad
still after that point. So,
yeah,
and she didn't even want to go marry Farquaad. So she actually wasn't using her lies about being an ogre to get married. She actually didn't want to go marry Farquaad for most of the movie.
But she did. So here's what actually happened. Your foolish revisionist history. The entire time Pixar pointed out that Lord Farquaad was short. They were making fun. Movie, they were whatever. They were making fun of Farquaad the entire time for being a tiny man, right? With great ambitions. They were clowning on him the entire time. What did they do to criticize Fiona for the fact that she basically was trying to hide the fact that she was an ogre to advance her own political agenda? Nothing. In fact, they made her out to be some sort of hero, justified all of her actions while making, of course, the hero of the story, in this case, Lord Farquaad, who wanted to get rid of a bunch of nutcases and lunatics and people who could cast witchcraft spells in his kingdom out. They made him out to be a villain, called him short, did horrible things, right? In order to besmirch the fine name of this man, while at the same time trying to cover Fiona for her evil deeds of trying to hide the fact that she was an ogre, right? And was only using this guy to get married to him to break her own curse. You didn't even point that out once, Ryan. Not once.
I don't know. I thought the Shrek example was a pretty good analogy, but we could go into that whole movie maybe, but yeah.
By the way, that was a Reddit thread. You got that? I was reading the Reddit thread.
Did it really? I used AI to
Ryan. Yeah, it came from a Reddit thread. You should just Google it. It's the first thing that pops up. Yeah,
that's fine. I don't care
about. It's called Shrek Deconstructing Toxic Masculinity.
Cool. Someone drew the analogy before I thought that
from Redditors, Ryan.
But it doesn't matter. Yeah, Ghosty.
Like, please. The best part of that movie is Donkey, and Donkey is like bringing Shrek out of those like toxic traits that he had, where he was pushing everybody away. Again, lack of
Why
emotional
was that?
intelligence.
Okay, so let's get into these
So he
two
wouldn't live
things.
alone. He could
Yeah,
like experience
what's wrong
love.
with him living alone?
Well, I mean, we are social creatures. Like,
Well,
it's
he's
not
an
healthy
ogre.
to live by yourself.
He's an ogre.
Okay, this is like an analogy though, right?
Yeah, but I
You
mean,
think
within
Shrek
the
was like fooled
confines.
into the marriage? Like
No,
you
within the
think that he didn't
confines.
want that at the end?
Do you think
Within the
Shrek was
confines.
Connection
happier?
and
Are you going to let
happiness,
me
yeah.
answer a question? You're just going to ask him.
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, in the analogy here, this is really simple, right? What is wrong with a guy wanting to be stoic and living alone? What's wrong with that?
Well, for the movie, like Shrek was way happier after he had like a community and marriage and kids and friends
Yeah,
and
that's
stuff,
called
right?
plot convenience.
So don't you think humans are kind of like meant to procreate and have relationships and stuff like that?
Yeah, except
So
for the ones who want to be left alone and live by themselves.
sure, and I guess that's fine, but
What's toxic about it? It's my question.
it's not.
Well, I would say the thing that
Go
was
ahead.
supporting the toxic perspective of masculinity was like he'd really internalized the rejection that he'd experienced from society. Again, I brought up the quote about him saying, I'm an awful ogre, I'm an ugly ogre," like wanted everyone to run away scared from him, and he was kind of engaging with this in a harmful way, where he was pushing anyone who could have connected with him away, like Donkey, for example, who he eventually becomes great friends with after Donkey expresses
He's
a
never
very
friends with
accepting,
Donkey.
positive example of masculinity
No.
to him through friendship, which I think
No.
all of us value friendship.
They're not friends. He doesn't even like him. He never likes him.
What?
He never even likes him through the second movie. He just tolerates him. That's one. And then
I
secondly,
disagree.
let's point out something that's pretty simple here, right? Oh, so people were trying to hunt down this guy and kill him. So he decided that he wanted to live alone and he didn't like people very much. That's actually not toxic. That would be healthy. That would be a
No,
healthy
he had a
thing to
bunch of
do.
people who were living in his swamp who were, I mean, they were kind of annoying, I guess you could
You
say.
mean people
But
who were trying to steal his property?
well, I think
Sort of.
the whole point is
Farquaad was
that
trying to steal his property.
Well, okay, by putting people on his property who were then living there and he wanted them off his property. Yeah.
Yeah, displacing them.
Yeah, I think I would be pretty annoyed if I just woke up tomorrow, don't you, Ryan, and there was 25 people on your property.
No doubt, yeah. Especially
Yeah,
if
yeah.
some
Would it
short asshole
be
over there pushed them
toxic
there.
of you to want them to leave so that you could live by yourself if you wanted to?
Not necessarily, but
No,
if it
no.
was if I used that my rejection of community based on my own internalized trauma from my past of being rejected by that society to avoid connection with those people or with anybody, then that might be toxic.
What
right?
if you just don't want? What if you don't want connection with people? That's still not toxic. You haven't actually shown me how that's
It
toxic.
doesn't-
You just assert that it is. So, like, let's say you're traumatized and don't want
do you
anything
think
to
that
do
men
with a
commit
community.
suicide more than women?
Yeah, but you know why? It's because they're better
Why?
at it. They actually do it. They actually attempt it at the same rates. Look it up. They attempted at the same
Yeah,
rates.
women
It's just
actually
that,
attempt higher. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, it's just that men use pistols, and so their success rate is much higher because they
So
actually
we
know
have
how to use them.
mental
If
health
women
crisis
actually
with men, no?
needed,
Or do you
well,
disagree?
no, actually, women suffer from mental health problems at exorbitant amounts in comparison to men. It's not even in the same universe. It's much higher for women. Much higher for
Are
women.
they
Yeah, I
are they
don't know
more
about
likely
that,
to
but-
seek help or not?
Women? Sure.
So the whole point is that it's not like a man who lives by himself because he has PTSD or something. He doesn't want to be around somebody. That's not necessarily like toxic to society. But if you want to live like a healthy life, I don't think anybody wants to like it's not a good idea to have people in isolation. That's just not healthy for humans in
Unless they
general.
want to be in isolation.
But if you're doing that out of like trauma, like you're traumatized and you have PTSD, you don't want to be around people, that means you're just living in a mentally unhealthy state. So
Do you know that there are men, for instance, who have to necessarily brave the brutals of warfare, and when they do, right, oftentimes there is no treatment. You can talk about treatment all you want, but you can't actually treat them. It doesn't matter if you give them pills. Doesn't matter how much you talk to them. Doesn't matter how much you have them in groups. And so a lot of those men end up isolating themselves, or they isolate themselves and their families both, right? And they kind of move away from general society and this type of thing because they actually know that they're quite dangerous. And so they isolate themselves from the group. This is very common. Men have been doing this, by the way, for thousands of years. You can go back and look at the literature on this for men who come back from war and isolate themselves for just this reason, because they know that they have impulse control issues, which came from warfare, things like this. Is that toxic?
So I have a lot of military family, and a lot of people who have served overseas in various extents, and it seems like to me, at least from my perspective, that they seem to find a lot of comfort in like a fraternity with others who served alongside them. Right, that community, that sense of community, is very, very important to them.
Ryan,
and without that,
you're not
I
answering
think they would
to
have
my
a lot more
criticism.
issues. Yeah,
I agree with you that there are groups.
Oh, cool. So we
and
agree.
there are things. Stop. And there are things about PTSD and things like this, which it seems to be helpful to have group support and things like this for some people. But for other people, it does nothing for them. Nothing. Because psychology is the study of the mind, not the study of the fucking brain. It's the study of the mind. It's a theoretical, philosophical science. It's not a hard science. It's a soft science. It's made up shit. It's
well, the
group
distinction
counseling.
between soft and hard science isn't actually, you're not standing on very solid ground there. They use the scientific method in the quote unquote soft sciences to collect data.
Yeah, that's true, Ryan. Interestingly, it's interesting that you say that. Have you ever heard of a thing called the replication crisis?
I'm aware.
Yeah, and what two fields suffer the most in the replication crisis in science?
Presumably psychology and I'm not sure what the other, sociology.
Sociology, yeah, sociology and psychology. Why is that? I thought they were employing the scientific
it doesn't really matter.
method
doesn't mean you
based
can
on
just
data.
dismiss. That doesn't mean you can just dismiss the entire field, right?
Well, I don't know, Ryan. If you had a 70% failure rate, right? If I were to offer you, I don't know, a whole thing of M&Ms and told you only 70% of them were poison, would you eat any?
Yeah, but that's not what we're doing. We're looking at we're looking at specific, like if we look at specific studies, we're looking at data that was collected, seeing the process of how that data was collected, and analyzing that specifically.
Yeah, the problem is that when they try to replicate that data, Ryan, when they try to replicate it, they can't replicate it. Even with the same control groups and the same scientists, they can't replicate it. That's what the replication crisis is. And they tried.
So
they've tried to go through with.
There's not patterns.
They've tried to go through with meta-analysis to try to solve this. They haven't solved it, and it's not even really getting better, Ryan, because it's not a real science. Sociology and psychology, not real sciences. Yes, it's true that you can use forms of the scientific method to collect data for fucking anything on planet Earth, by the way, which would include this field. That doesn't mean that you're employing the scientific process, and here's why. What's the first step in the scientific method, Ryan?
You tell me.
What's the first step?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know any science.
Well, okay. What's the scientific method? Can you tell me that? Can you just tell me the scientific method?
We're not here to talk about the scientific method, are we?
Can you tell me the scientific method or not, Ryan?
No, I'm not going to entertain it.
No? You can't tell me the scientific. So you're going to tell me about science. You can't. Okay. Well, the first step is observation. Do you agree with that?
Sure. So are we going to walk through the scientific method, or are we going to talk about the fact that initially you just said that the thing that we were identifying was true? It's just redefined. You just redefined it as social carnage. So you accepted from the get-go.
No. I think that you redefined
the thing that people are identifying
you redefined social carnage.
You agreed right out the gate.
Which people? Which people?
Well, I have a point to make.
Wait, hang on, Ryan. Which people?
No, I yield my time.
No, Ryan, answer my question. Which people?
I don't have to do that.
I think you're just making a fallacious argument.
Andrew, please calm down, Andrew.
I think you're just making an argument ad populum.
Okay, so I kind of want to like tie this back to where.
Yeah, go ahead, Ghosty.
So, the point is, you're saying that these men, and I want to move on from this after this, it's kind of like a rabbit hole. But these men who are living in isolation because they have PTSD or whatever, that them living in isolation isn't necessarily toxic, but you would admit that they are living in isolation due to like an unhealthy mind. Like they have PTSD, they have trauma, right? That's why they're living.
We don't know what a healthy mind. We don't know what a healthy mind looks like.
You just admitted that they said they could be a danger to society. So
all we can do is base.
They are not they're automatically not healthy.
Listen. I'll answer your questions, but if you ask me one and I start to answer it and then you overwrite it, I can't answer it. So I'm just letting you know. So you asked me a question. Okay. So you're not answering. Okay. If you're not asking a question,
she was finishing the part of the question, but go ahead.
So I'll just answer your question, right? What happens is when sometimes people ask a question and put their own qualifiers on it and engage in their own form of fallacy called question begging, where what they do is they essentially in question begging, you're putting the conclusion of the argument in the premise itself, which is, I mean, it's absurd. So backing up, let's just look at this. What I'm saying to you is very simple, that you don't know what a healthy mind looks like, because to you, minds don't even exist. A mind doesn't even exist. It's just a brain. That's all you consider a mind to be. If that is the case, you don't even know what a healthy brain looks like. We don't know what healthy chemical compounds in a brain do or don't look like. Everybody has different brains, and you could have a person who has a brain which he was a psychopath and it appears to be completely normal, or you could have 5 psychopaths who have a brain that looks X way, and then you take another person who's not a psychopath's brain, it looks exactly like that.
Okay,
Well, you can't make a determination about what even a healthy brain
But
is.
in this society, we can deem what is
behavior.
We can deem behaviors that are healthy, right? For society.
And who
okay,
gets
sure.
to determine that?
I mean, society, I guess.
Okay,
like,
society's determining it.
So if somebody can't live in a group because they think they're dangerous, or they have PTSD or something, they are that would be an unhealthy person in this context, right? So automatically, like, again, I don't know if I would call that toxic masculinity, but if somebody's living by themselves because they feel they're dangerous, that wouldn't be an example of the healthiest person in a society.
So Ghosty, let us assume for a moment you agree with me that war is a necessary condition of humanity, at least so far in our history.
I mean, I
before
not,
you
but yes.
before you continue on, I just want to point out that the topic is a little shifted outside of the dynamics of the prompt. So I want you to go ahead and finish this little variation of it, but I would like to bring it back. I know it's on topic.
Toxic masculinity itself is arbitrary, and so they're trying to give examples of what it is, and I'm trying to refute those examples.
Right.
So example 1, when it comes to this, if it's a necessary condition of war or of the human experience, there's going to be war. If somebody is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and cannot be treated for it, Ghosty, they can't be treated. All treatment has failed, so they self-isolate.
Unhealthy person.
What would you do with them, Ghosty?
I mean, if they want to live by themselves, that's fine. And again,
then that sounds perfectly healthy to me.
I'm not saying that's toxic.
So they're fulfilling their societal role then. Is that what you're saying to me? They're fulfilling their societal and social role?
I mean, I guess in that, like, I don't know. I don't see it that way.
You don't know?
If they literally cannot get better, which I don't know if that's even true.
Oh, yeah. Well, so psychology doesn't cure anybody.
But
there's nobody gets cured.
Okay. Well,
because there's no disease. There's no disease process. It's not a disease, right? You don't, like, your depression's it's not a disease. So if you have a person who you're treating who responds to no treatment and then self-isolates, it sounds like they're fulfilling their role for societal expectation just fine to me. It doesn't sound like they're unhealthy by your standards. What would be toxic about that?
Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily toxic, but I'm saying that example you're giving isn't like an example of a healthy person. So the example is kind of mute. There's really no point to talking about it.
Then why'd you bring it up as an example of toxic masculinity?
Well, you brought up the
Yeah,
war guy in
that was your
isolation.
Example.
So
no, it was your Shrek example.
Yeah, this all started with Shrek, and then Andrew. Hold on. It started with Shrek, and then Andrew pointed out why he isolated himself. He broke down what you were saying about
because
it.
society rejected him.
Yeah,
so Shrek wasn't a war victim.
He went to war.
Yeah,
right?
so let's look at your ideas. Well, he was suffering from very similar post-traumatic stress disorder that you would see from somebody who was in a war.
Do you disagree with my definition of toxic masculinity? I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think that social carnage fits it better.
Okay, so you agree that the underlying thing exists, and I guess I mean debate 1 by that standard at least, so we can move on to.
I agree that social carnage exists and is a necessary conditional for humanity and is good.
What is social carnage? I don't know what that means.
But I literally spent my whole opening defining it for you. Would you like me to pull it back up for you?
Or would you like explain what you meant by it a little bit in a more conversational manner, right?
Yeah, so social carnage would be behavior which women consider to be suboptimal in men and toxic.
So to translate, I believe like men would in theory view this as normal behavior. This is just what they do.
And
Like
you
he gave
consider
the
it to be toxic.
example, right? He gave the example of like shooting the squirrel with the BB gun and the ha
Yeah.
ha ha, fuck you, whatever.
Mhm.
Whereas a
Is
woman
that
would look at
toxic?
that. A woman would look
Not
at that and
necessarily.
get the ick
When
from
I'm
it.
driving
Right?
down the road and I swerve to hit the raccoon and my wife is freaking out and I'm like, ha 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 ha
I
ha.
think if you do that on
Is that
purpose,
toxic?
I personally
Is that toxic?
think
Yeah,
that's toxic,
maybe
Okay.
that might
Can you
suggest an underlying.
can you hang on? Can you scientifically break down how that's toxic? Why is that toxic?
I think it would suggest an eagerness to engage in violence in a way that is probably unproductive for engaging with society. But I mean,
It
you
seems
know,
it
if that's,
seems
if that's
highly
the way that
productive.
you if that's the way you want to
Well-
engage, I just think you're going to run into more conflict if you embrace that in more situations than not.
What conflict? Usually the guy behind me, he swerves too because he wants to make sure it's dead.
Oh my god.
What do you mean?
Oh my god.
And by the way, that's what you
Fantastic. You're
call
fostering
hang on, that's what you
community,
call pickup points. So if I get 10 points for the initial hit and it's not dead and it's still like dragging across the road, and then the guy behind me swerves to take it out completely, he picks up 20 points. Now that
I mean,
fucker and me
it's
are
a
in a
funny
contest.
bit, but you're not really addressing anything, right?
No, I am. I'm asking you why that's toxic. Prove it's toxic. Prove it.
I mean, I think I just said that, like, if you are seeking, it could suggest, I'm not saying it necessarily does. I'm saying it could suggest an eagerness to engage in violence where violence isn't necessary.
What do
especially
you-
in a
well,
car,
hang on,
when
hang on,
you're,
wait,
where
wait,
you're,
what
like,
do you mean
endangering the
necessary?
lives of other people.
Wait, what do you mean necessary? This is exactly what I mean by social carnage. I think that men have a standard for when necessary is that women do not have. I think, for instance, if a guy's talking shit to me about my wife and I smack him across the mouth, that was necessary. However, you could make the argument it was unnecessary, couldn't you, Ryan?
So it was necessary to put the people who are in the car's lives in danger to kill a raccoon on the road.
Their lives
for
weren't
no
in
reason?
danger. Their lives weren't in danger.
I mean,
said
you
you're
don't know what could
swerving to hit the
happen.
squirrel?
Yeah.
Yeah, you give it a slight swerve.
There could be
Yep.
a pedestrian walking or something that you didn't
Yeah, there's no
see. There could be-
pedestrian.
Well, you don't know that.
Yeah, you do know that because you have eyeballs. I don't
Well,
know
if you
I don't
don't
know
see
about you, but
them-
when I'm
if
driving,
you
I
don't
can see
see them,
pedestrians.
There's blind spots. There's tons of
Yeah,
things
that's
that
a
could happen.
condition of driving, period. I could not see a pedestrian, I guess, who's right in front of me,
Okay,
too.
but if you're purposely swerving to kill an innocent animal for no reason, I think
Innocent?
that's pretty unnecessary.
Innocent. Raccoons are
See, now we're
killers.
debating the innocence
Well,
of a squirrel instead of
an-
talking
an
about the
innocent-
question of the debate. Right?
innocent
Raccoons are
versus-
murdering
innocent-
psychopaths.
Innocent versus like a bear that's
no,
coming
wait
to
a
kill
second.
you.
I
Like,
am helping society. Raccoons are psychopathic lunatics who steal, they rob, they kill with wild abandon, they kill chickens, they steal eggs, they put families' livelihoods at risk.
what are you
I am
talk-
doing my part as a member of the community. What we have done is we have decided to play a game in order to help keep the population of these fucking vermin down. And so when you see one, you smack them, you take them out, right? And it helps thin them out. And so what we did was we took this trait that you would consider to be violent or
I live in the
psychopathic.
city.
Hang on.
I walk up to
Or
raccoons
hang on,
like on a
listen,
daily
listen.
basis.
You don't walk up to
They're
raccoons
fine.
in this city. But anyway,
Are you kidding? They're
yeah,
literally
take a
in the
video next
street
time.
everywhere.
Yeah, you go pet a raccoon, take a video next
I
time.
don't
But anyway,
pet them.
yeah,
I'm not
anyway,
against
so
hunting or anything.
so let me
I don't-
finish my point. My point is that so here's what happens because these things are such a plague, right? What we do out here in the country is we play a little game, right? Where we kill the shit out of these little bastards every time we see them. Huge social good, by the way. Helps preserve people's livelihoods, helps keep chickens alive, helps keep their eggs intact, right? But from your view, it'd be toxic as fuck, even though it actually serves a greater purpose, right?
In a
Serves a
car.
greater
It was actually
purpose. And what I'm
asserted
saying
it was
by
necessary,
what I'm saying by necessary social carnage is you don't understand that portion of why men's behavior is this way. Men's behavior is not always altogether apparent to women who don't see
Andrew,
the bigger picture or
you
let me
literally
finish or feminine men who don't see the bigger picture, don't understand that men can use what you consider to be toxic masculinity is actually social carnage, which is good for society generally.
Mhm. You said
And
that
it exists.
3 times. But you literally said
Social
the reason
carnage
you were
exists.
doing it, the reason you were running over the raccoon wasn't for society goodness or to help the chicken and the eggs and shit. It was to get 10 points and
Yeah.
laugh at your wife who yelled at you.
Yeah, but it still serves a greater purpose. So what? So what if I enjoyed
not
the
the
process
reason.
of running the little bastard over? What does that have to do with
You're
anything?
just adding on other things to try to make it seem
to try to
necessary.
explain to you that the things that you consider to be toxic actually serve a greater good. Same thing with aggression in men. Same thing with men who are willing to commit to violence for various actions at various times, even though you think it might not be justified because you may hurt your feelings. Let me ask you this, Ghosty. If you were out with your boyfriend, right, and a guy walked over and he started calling you a bunch of names, let's say he called you like just the most horrible shit you could imagine, but he didn't touch you. He didn't touch you. He didn't put his hands on you. Should your boyfriend defend your honor?
It's honestly not even worth it.
He shouldn't defend your honor?
I mean, it depends on the situation, but in most cases, I would say it's just not worth it to get into these. Like,
so
I
what if
just
the
don't
guy
give a
looks at
fuck.
him and he says,
He doesn't
you're
give
not
a
even
fuck.
going to protect your woman's honor? I could just talk to her like this, bro?
Yeah, our egos aren't that. We don't care. We'll just walk
So
away
your
and go have a
boyfriend
good
wouldn't.
time.
Yeah, I
Your
don't know that
boyfriend wouldn't care.
like the idea that
No.
like not engaging in violence in that situation is like a
Okay.
shameful thing. I think is
Hang on.
is
That's
more
totally fair.
embarrassing. Like,
Totally fair.
You're giving the control over to that guy who's like trying
Yeah,
to provoke you. Like,
I
which is a
get it,
very
Ryan.
weak-minded thing to do, right?
Ryan, I get it. So I'll just ask you the same
Apparently not, I
question.
don't know.
Let's say that Ghosty is your girlfriend, okay? And you were out with her on the town, and some guy was just being horrible to her and calling her all sorts of names and besmirching her honor.
I've been out in
would
town
you do
with women.
Ryan? Would you do something?
Yes.
Would you do something about it?
Yeah, I speak up when I'm in situations like that. Yes.
So you're going to speak up,
Yes.
but that could lead to violence, Ryan.
It could if someone else initiates it, but I'm less likely to.
So
yeah,
that's
but
why,
hang on, you just speaking up can initiate violence, Ryan. Like if you
that's why I
hadn't said
it
anything,
depends.
if you hadn't
Not
said
necessarily.
anything, wait, how's you speaking up going to defuse violence?
It doesn't necessarily, but it can. I'm pretty. I don't know. I've been in a lot of situations where I've been pretty decent at de-escalating the situation. I think a good amount of emotional intelligence can help with that. So that's another thing.
Emotional
That's why I
intelligence.
said it
you.
depends. You have to be able to read the situation. Like, is this person super drunk and they seem like they're trying to start a fight, or are they just like walking by and saying shit? And you can tell, you can like say something back. And
What if he
they're
grabbed
probably
her
just gonna
ass,
keep
Ryan?
walking.
What if he was walking by and he grabbed her ass? What would you do then?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. You're not sure what you would do if a guy went over and grabbed your woman's ass. You're not sure what you would do.
I might get in his face.
I'd probably smack him.
Yeah. Well, here's the
rather
thing.
me
Here's the
smack
thing,
him
Ryan.
than my
Let me just ask you this last question, and then I'll submit myself to your inquiry. Do you think that a woman who you're out with, who gets her ass grabbed by a random guy, she turns around, is confronting him, and you aren't sure what to do, and another guy walks over and says, "Hey, fucker," and lays his ass out, who do you think she's going home with that night, Ryan? You or that guy?
Probably still me.
No. Okay. And you are, for the record, Ryan,
I mean,
you are.
I've never been in a
Ryan,
situation where I felt like
yeah,
my relationship with a
for the record,
partner
Ryan,
was gonna change in one
Yeah.
quick moment because
For
of
the record,
an assault.
yeah. For the record, though, Ryan, you are single, right?
Currently, yeah, but I spent like 10 years not being single.
Mm-hmm.